Welcome in, everybody. Ready to dive into Howard Lutnick.
Let's do it.
This guy, he's been all over the news, stirring up all sorts of opinions. So we've got interviews, analyses, news reports, the whole shebang. We're going to try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack.
There really is, and I think what's interesting is that you see this thread of resilience and controversy, this ambition that runs through everything he does. And it kind of all comes back to, well, you know the story, Cantor Fitzgerald and 9/11.
Yeah, Cantor Fitzgerald's loss on 9/11 was just devastating. 658 employees, including Lutnick's own brother.
It's hard to even fathom the impact, not just on the company, but on him personally.
It's almost impossible to imagine.
But what really struck me is how he responded. He rebuilt the company, of course, but he dedicated 25% of Cantor Fitzgerald's profits for 5 years to the families of those who were lost, something like $180 million total. And then he covered their health insurance for a decade.
Yeah, that's right.
That's extraordinary.
It is, and I think that's where we start to see these contrasting views of Lutnick emerge. That level of generosity, it earned him a huge amount of admiration. Even some of his toughest critics in the business world, they had to acknowledge the compassion he showed.
It makes it even more puzzling that some people call him the most hated guy on Wall Street.
Right.
So how do you square that? This guy who showed such incredible empathy, but then you have these accusations of ruthlessness.
Well, the accusations really stem from his business practices at Cantor Fitzgerald. Some former employees and partners, they claim he was squeezing them financially. They point to these incredibly complex partnership agreements. We're talking hundreds of pages long. And they say it was a way for Lutnick to benefit at their expense.
So even though they were partners in the firm, they felt like they were getting a raw deal when they left.
That's the allegation. Estimates suggest that almost half of the partners who left Cantor Fitzgerald believe they didn't receive what they were owed. Now, Lutnick's defenders, they argue that these partners just couldn't handle his, well, let's say, tough management style, or they didn't understand the intricacies of the partnership agreements. But the accusations are out there, and they paint a very different picture of Lutnick than the one we see after 9/11.
It's like we're looking at two different sides of the same coin. You have this compassionate leader who steps up in a crisis, but then you have this hard-nosed businessman who's accused of taking advantage of the people around him. And then to make things even more interesting, this already complicated figure enters the political arena as a major supporter of Donald Trump.
And not just any supporter. Lutnick was a key fundraiser for Trump. He had the president's ear. So when Trump returned to the White House for his second term, well, Lutnick's political influence became pretty hard to ignore.
He was picked to co-chair Trump's 2024 transition team, a position that gave him a lot of power and say in the new administration.
Yeah, you have to understand that's not a small thing. Co-chairing the transition team, you're basically helping to decide who will fill all the important positions in the government. You're setting the agenda.
And it really set the stage for what came next, because in early 2025, Lutnick is nominated and confirmed as Commerce Secretary. It's like this unexpected twist in his story.
Right, Wall Street to Washington.
What did you think about that appointment?
Well, it was polarizing, to say the least. Some people thought it was a great idea. They saw his business background as a huge plus. They thought his experience at Cantor Fitzgerald would make him a really strong advocate for American businesses.
Yeah. But there were others who were a lot more skeptical, especially because of those allegations about his business practices.
Definitely, yeah. They questioned whether someone with those accusations still hanging over their head, was it really the right fit for such a high-profile government position? Especially because, let's face it, he had zero government experience.
But he stepped into the role with a very clear economic vision, something he called "make it here."
Yeah.
And he has been vocal about that vision. He's a strong advocate for American manufacturing. And I remember that quote, make it here, make it here. How hard is that to say? He really drove that point home.
He's made it very clear he believes in bringing back those manufacturing jobs to the U.S. He sees tariffs as necessary, to protect American industries from what he views as unfair competition from other countries.
And he's even predicted that robotics and AI are going to revolutionize American production. He says it will create all these high-paying jobs that don't even require college degrees.
It's a bold prediction. It'll be interesting to see if it pans out. Will all this new technology actually create more jobs, or will it lead to people losing their jobs? That's something a lot of economists are debating.
It's a good question to think about, because if Lutnick's vision becomes reality, it could have a huge impact on the job market.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's another part of Lutnick's strategy that I found really surprising, his use of tariffs in the fight against fentanyl.
Yeah, he's framed tariffs on Mexico and Canada not just as a trade tactic, but as like a weapon in this drug war. He says these tariffs are a way to pressure those countries to do more to stop fentanyl from coming into the United States.
And he's been very direct about it. He says Mexico and Canada are trying, but that it hasn't been enough to make a real difference in the number of fentanyl deaths in the U.S.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, is this framing genuine, or is it a way to justify his protectionist policies?
It's a good question. I mean, you have to remember, Lutnick's a master negotiator.
Yeah.
He knows how to use every tool he's got to get what he wants. It's certainly possible that he's using the fentanyl crisis to try to advance his broader trade agenda.
That's definitely worth considering because whether it's genuine concern or a strategic move, it's definitely gotten people talking about the issue.
It has.
And it really shows how Lutnick connects his economic vision to these broader policy goals.
That's true. It all ties into a key principle that drives Lutnick's entire approach to trade, what he calls reciprocity. He wants to put a broad reciprocal trade policy into place.
Reciprocity, for those who aren't familiar with that term, it basically means you treat us how we treat you. Lutnick wants to adjust tariffs based on how other countries treat American goods and businesses.
He's essentially saying, play by our rules or you're going to pay the price.
Exactly, and he's serious about it. He set a specific date, April 2nd, 2025. That's when he plans to start this new policy.
Yeah, that's just around the corner. It's a pretty bold move, and it could have a major impact on the global economy. I mean, who knows what could happen?
It's a huge deal. But it's not just about tariffs. Lutnick has this much bigger vision, this big picture in mind.
He's incredibly optimistic about the American economy. He said that trillions of dollars in manufacturing investment are coming back to America, even that the cavalry is coming for economic growth under Trump.
He's also a huge proponent of balancing the budget. He says it will lead to interest rate cuts and a booming economy.
It's quite the prediction, and not everyone agrees.
No, not everyone. Some analysts are worried about an economic slowdown, especially in manufacturing. They're pointing to data that doesn't exactly support Lutnick's rosy outlook.
Right.
So the question becomes, is Lutnick's confidence, is it justified? Or is he maybe downplaying the potential risks? Is he being realistic? Or is this just blind optimism?
It's a question worth asking yourself. Because if you're trying to make sense of Lutnick's economic vision, I mean, his success or failure could directly affect you, your wallet, your job, even your future.
So it's like we're all on this economic roller coaster, and Lutnick's the one at the controls.
And we have to decide, do we trust his instincts, or do we brace ourselves for a wild ride?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure.
It is, and we are just scratching the surface here. There is so much more to uncover about Howard Lutnick. But stay with us, because when we come back, we're going to be diving into some of the most controversial aspects of his story, including his account of that explosive peace meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky.
That's right. We're going to get into that and more, so don't go anywhere.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
It really is fascinating how Lutnick can embrace these positions that seem completely at odds. He's this Wall Street powerhouse, but he's adopted this populist message of bringing back manufacturing jobs to America, even calling himself a peacemaker, while advocating for these, almost aggressive tactics like tariffs. It's a real paradox.
It really is. And, speaking of that peacemaker label, we can't just gloss over that recent controversy about Lutnick's account of the meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky.
Oh, right. That meeting in the Oval Office.
Yeah, the one that was supposed to be like this ceremonial signing of a peace agreement.
It was.
But according to Lutnick, who was there, things didn't exactly go as planned.
No, not at all.
He called Zelensky's behavior shocking. He said that the Ukrainian president came in with this list of demands and refused to make any concessions.
He did.
So what were these demands?
Well, if you believe Lutnick, Zelensky wanted security guarantees from the U.S., $300 billion, that's billion with a B, in reparations from Russia, and he wouldn't budge. He said he wouldn't sign any peace deal unless he got everything he wanted.
That's a hard line to take.
It is.
So how did Lutnick interpret this?
He basically implied that Zelensky's demands were unreasonable, that he was more interested in, playing to the cameras than actually working towards peace. He even called him a troublemaker.
And then there's that incident with Vice President J.D. Vance. What happened there?
Oh, yeah. Well, according to Lutnick, Vance spoke up during the meeting, and he told Zelensky he should at least thank President Trump for the $300 billion in aid that the U.S. had already given to Ukraine.
So Vance was basically trying to nudge Zelensky towards being more cooperative, acknowledge the U.S. support, and maybe soften his stance a bit in the peace talks.
That's how Lutnick presented it.
Yeah.
He defended Vance, saying he was just trying to get Zelensky to see how committed the U.S. was to helping Ukraine.
Right. But it's important to remember that we're only getting one side of the story here.
That's a good point. We only have Lutnick's version of events. It's crucial to keep that in mind and realize that there could be other perspectives on how things played out.
It's really important because this wasn't just any meeting. The fact that these peace talks fell apart, it could have some serious consequences for the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So understanding different perspectives on what went wrong, that's crucial.
Absolutely. It highlights how important it is to look for those different viewpoints, to not just rely on a single narrative.
It makes me think back to something we discussed earlier, that kind of tension between Lutnick's actions and how people see those actions. Is he this brilliant negotiator who's working in America's best interest? Or is he someone who, bends the rules to get what he wants?
It's a question that's probably going to follow Lutnick throughout his career, and it's something each of us has to think about as we try to figure out what kind of impact he's having on the world.
It's really interesting how one person can generate such strong opinions and how different those opinions can be. On the one hand, you have this Wall Street titan, he's built a financial empire. On the other, he's a self-proclaimed peacemaker who isn't afraid to play hardball to reach his goals. It's complicated.
It is, and it gets even more interesting when you consider the long game he seems to be playing. He's not just focused on the immediate situation. He's thinking about America's place in the world decades from now.
Like he's always thinking a few steps ahead.
Exactly.
But some critics argue that this vision he has for America's future, it's built on a shaky foundation.
Yeah, they point to his unwavering support for President Trump,
Yeah.
whose policies have been, let's just say, controversial.
They wonder if Lutnick's make it here philosophy, if it's actually going to benefit American workers in the long run.
They say his reliance on tariffs, that it could end up causing prices to go up for consumers, that it could even hurt the industries he's trying to protect.
It's a valid concern. I mean, tariffs are basically a tax on goods that come from other countries. And a lot of times, those costs are passed on to the people who buy those goods.
That's right. So while Lutnick is talking about creating jobs and boosting the economy, some critics are worried that his policies might backfire, that they'll hurt the very people he says he's trying to help.
So where does that leave us? We have this complicated figure. He's been praised and criticized. He's driven by ambition and this strong belief in his own vision for America. How do we make sense of it all?
I think the important thing is to avoid those easy labels, those simple answers. Lutnick is a product of his experiences, his successes, his failures, all of it.
He's a man who faced unimaginable tragedy after 9/11 and rebuilt his company from nothing. He's a businessman who's made billions of dollars, and now he's a powerful figure in the U.S. government, shaping policies that affect all of us. It's a lot to take in.
And it's a story that's still being written. It's full of twists and turns, and it's a story that we need to engage with. We need to think about it carefully with an open mind.
Yeah, because whether you agree with him or not, Howard Lutnick is a force to be reckoned with. His actions, his words, his vision, they are shaping the world we live in. It's up to each of us to understand what that means.
This deep dive, it's give you a glimpse into Lutnick's world, his strategies, his motivations, but it's really just the beginning.
There's always more to learn, more perspectives to think about, more questions to ask. So don't stop here. Keep digging, keep exploring, and keep questioning what you think you know.
Because at the end of the day, the best way to deal with this complicated world is to stay informed, to be involved, and to be willing to think critically.
This has been an incredible journey so far, and I hope you're feeling as excited as I am to keep learning more about this really fascinating guy. But before we wrap things up completely, there's one last piece of the puzzle we need to examine. Going through all this material on Howard Lutnick, I keep thinking about him as a gambler. He takes these calculated risks, makes these huge bets, and seems to be going all in on his vision of American economic dominance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. And I think, like any good gambler, Lutnick understands leverage. He knows how to use his position, his influence, to try and get the outcome he wants.
We saw it with his response to 9/11. He took this moment of just unbelievable tragedy and turned it into an opportunity to not only rebuild Cantor Fitzgerald, but to kind of reshape its image.
Right.
And then you see it again with his unwavering support of Donald Trump, aligning himself with a powerful and controversial figure who shares that America First worldview.
Yeah, and we definitely see it in his approach to tariffs. He's not afraid to use them as a tool to reshape global trade in a way that he thinks, will benefit America. But the question is, will it work? I mean, will this gamble pay off?
Yeah, it's definitely a high stakes game. And something that keeps popping up in all these articles and interviews is this question of Lutnick's motivations. Is he really trying to help American workers? Or is this all about, personal gain and consolidating power?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it's worth considering that his motivations might be a lot more complex.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't see a conflict between pursuing his own interests and what he sees as advancing the interests of America, a country that he obviously believes in very strongly.
I mean, he was a businessman, right?
Right.
Profit is always going to be a factor in the decisions he makes, but at the same time, he seems to genuinely believe in that make it here philosophy. He really sees this future where American manufacturing comes back strong, where technology creates new opportunities, and where the U.S. is the one setting the rules of global trade.
And that vision really seems to resonate with President Trump, who's praised Lutnick's business smarts and his focus on creating American jobs.
It all goes back to that quote from Lutnick. The long-term trait of Donald Trump is you bet on him and he is a winner and he is going to win for America. That really sums up their shared worldview, I think.
It does, and it suggests that Lutnick's influence on the Trump administration's economic policies is likely to be pretty substantial, which means his successes and failures in this role, they could have a real impact on all of us.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. His policies on things like trade and manufacturing, they could affect prices, jobs, even the products that are available to you. It's kind of a big deal.
We're all in on this gamble together, in a way. The decisions Lutnick makes as Commerce Secretary are going to have these ripple effects throughout the American economy and probably even further.
So the question we're left with is Howard Lutnick the right person to lead America into this new economic era? Is he this visionary who can revitalize American industry and create some kind of lasting prosperity? Or will these aggressive tactics and his protectionist policies end up backfiring?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one that each of us has to grapple with based on the information we have. We've tried to give you a starting point with this deep dive, a look into Howard Lutnick's world, his strategies, his vision for the future.
But this isn't the end of the story. There's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider. So we encourage you to keep looking into this, keep asking those tough questions, and don't be afraid to challenge what you think you know.
Because the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to understand this complex world and figure out what's really going on. You know what I mean?
I completely agree. And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Howard Lutnick. It's been a wild ride.
It has.
And I hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, maybe even a little bit unsettling, because that's how we felt putting it together.
Definitely.
But, that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. We get to explore these complex issues, these larger-than-life personalities, and hopefully we all come away with a better understanding of the forces that are shaping our lives. So until next time, keep learning, keep thinking, and keep diving deep.